Welcome back to my channel, where real story takes its time. Let's get into it.
My name is Steve, and I've always been the responsible one in my family. The one everyone calls when something breaks, when someone needs a favor, or when bills suddenly become impossible to pay this month. I used to take pride in that. I thought being dependable meant being respected. Turns out, in my family, it just meant I was the easiest one to use. I grew up with a mom who adored appearances. She cared less about the people in her life and more about what others thought of her. My aunt, her younger sister Clara, was her twin in spirit, only louder, greedier, and somehow more manipulative. The two of them could turn any situation into an emotional trap, and for most of my life, I didn't even realize I was caught in one. The thing about people like them is that they know exactly how to make you feel guilty for having boundaries. My mom used to say things like, "Family helps family, Steve." That's how we were raised. Whenever I hesitated to pay for something, it started small: gas money, a grocery run, a temporary loan for Clara's daughter's textbooks. But as I got older and started earning a stable income, their requests evolved into something else entirely. They began to expect it. My Aunt Clara was the worst about it. She'd call with that syrupy voice of hers, all fake sweetness, saying things like, "Oh, Stevie, you're my favorite nephew. I just need a tiny favor, sweetheart. I promise I'll pay you back next week." Of course, next week never came. It never did. For years, I made excuses for them. They're family, I'd tell myself. They just need a little help. But after a while, the pattern became impossible to ignore. They never tried to fix their situations. They just relied on me to fix them for them. Last month, it all came to a head. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday evening. I remember because I'd just gotten home from work, exhausted, and I saw Clara's name flash across my screen. I already knew what it was about. It always was. I almost didn't answer, but something in me still couldn't ignore her. Maybe I was hoping it'd be different this time. "Stevie," she sang the moment I picked up, her tone bright like she was performing. "Oh, thank goodness you answered. I was just telling your mother how lucky we are to have such a generous young man in the family." There it was. The setup. I sighed quietly. "What's going on, Aunt Clara?" She let out this exaggerated sigh, the kind she used whenever she wanted to sound helpless. "Oh, you know how things are. Prices these days are just impossible. My husband's hours got cut, and I've been trying to juggle everything. But," she paused dramatically, "our internet bill is due tomorrow, and if it's not paid, they'll cut us off. You know how your cousins need it for school." It was always for the kids, always wrapped in guilt. I asked how much, even though I already knew I shouldn't have. "Just $190, she said quickly, too quickly, like she'd rehearsed it. "I promise I'll pay you back by Friday. Your mom even said she'd help me if I needed to, but you're usually faster with these things." That made me pause. Mom said that. "Oh yes," she chirped. She said, "Just ask Steve. He's always willing to help." I don't know what it was about that line, but it made my stomach turn. Something about the way she said it, like it wasn't praise, but expectation. Still, I told her I'd see what I could do. I hung up, went to transfer the money, and then I stopped. I don't even know why. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was that quiet part of me that had finally had enough. Either way, I decided to wait until the morning. And thank God I did, because that's when I got the call that changed everything. The next morning, around 9 a.m., my aunt called again. I answered, ready to tell her I'd transfer the money after work. But before I could say a word, she was already mid-conversation. Only she didn't realize she hadn't hung up the phone from her end yet. Her voice came through clearly. "He's such an idiot," she said, laughing. "He'll always say yes. He's basically my personal ATM at this point." My stomach dropped. Then I heard my mother's voice. Calm, smug, agreeing. "Let him think he's important. That's how you keep him doing things for you." I froze. My hand literally trembled holding the phone. I didn't even breathe. I just listened as they both laughed, my mom and my aunt, mocking me like I was some clueless fool. Clara's voice dropped to a whisper, like she was sharing a secret. "I bet he'll send it before lunch. He always does." They kept talking for another minute before I finally hung up. My chest felt tight, like something inside me had cracked open. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, replaying every single time they'd called me sweet, every time they said I was so kind, every time they guilt-tripped me for saying no. It all made sense now. They didn't love me. They didn't respect me. I was just useful. And that realization hurt more than I can describe. That night, I didn't answer when my mom called. I didn't send the money either. I didn't reply to Clara's texts asking if I'd taken care of it yet. I just sat back and waited. By the third day, my silence had become unbearable for them. That's when things started to unravel. Their internet got cut off first. Then the calls started coming in, one after another, dozens of them. I ignored every single one. But when my phone buzzed that evening and I saw 41 missed calls, 11 voicemails, and a single message from Clara that said, "What happened?" something in me shifted. I just stared at it for a long time. My heart wasn't racing anymore. I wasn't angry, not yet. I just felt calm, like I was finally seeing everything clearly for the first time. And as much as I wanted to respond immediately, I didn't. Because I realized this was bigger than one phone call. This was years of manipulation, guilt, and control that needed to end properly. So I came up with a plan. When I went to bed that night, I didn't sleep much. My phone kept lighting up on the nightstand, flashing with their names over and over again. Aunt Clara, Mom, sometimes even my cousin Lydia. I didn't answer a single one. I just stared at the ceiling and thought about every moment that led me to that point. It's strange how quiet can feel heavy. The house was silent, but my head was loud, full of memories I didn't want but couldn't turn off. I kept replaying every moment I'd bent over backwards to help them. The time I paid for Lydia's school trip when Clara claimed she forgot to submit the form on time. The time I canceled my own vacation because Mom called crying about unexpected car repairs. The time they both invited me to a family dinner that turned out to be a thinly veiled attempt to get me to co-sign Clara's new car loan. I used to laugh those things off. I used to think I was being a good son, a good nephew. But lying there in the dark, I realized that every single one of those moments was them testing how far they could push me. And each time, I'd proved that I had no limits. Until now. By morning, the calls had stopped. I guess they'd worn themselves out. I got up, brewed a pot of coffee, and sat by the window, watching the street outside. I could see the world moving on as usual. Neighbors leaving for work, kids on bikes, the mail truck making its rounds. And there I was, sitting in silence, finally feeling the weight of years of manipulation slowly slide off my shoulders. Then, around 10 a.m., my mom showed up at my door. I should have expected it, but still, my stomach tightened when I saw her car in the driveway. She didn't even knock politely. She rang the bell 3 times in a row, sharp, impatient. When I opened the door, she was already scowling. "Steve," she said, stepping inside without waiting for me to invite her. "What on earth is going on with you?" I blinked. "Good morning to you too." She ignored that. "Your aunt's been trying to reach you for days. You know her situation is difficult right now, and she told me you promised to help her. Then you just disappeared." Her tone wasn't worried. It was accusatory, like I'd done something wrong. I folded my arms. I didn't disappear. I just decided not to send the money. Her expression changed instantly. The scowl deepened into something colder. "Excuse me," I said. I repeated slowly. "I decided not to send it." She laughed, not out of amusement, but disbelief. "You're joking. Steve, this isn't funny. Clara's internet has been cut off. The kids need it for school. Maybe she should have paid the bill then," I said quietly. That made her pause. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly. "What's gotten into you?" I didn't answer right away. I just watched her, the way she stood there in my living room, acting like she owned the place. Like it was her right to barge in and demand explanations. Finally, I said, "I heard you, Mom, the other day, when Clara called me." She frowned. "What are you talking about?" "She forgot to hang up," I said, my voice low and steady. "I heard everything." For a moment, she didn't move. She just stood there, blinking, as if trying to process what I'd said. Then her lips pressed into a thin line. "Steve," she started carefully, "whatever you think you heard." "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't lie," you said. "Let him think he's important." That made her go still. The mask slipped, just for a second, and what I saw underneath wasn't guilt. It was irritation. like I'd caught her doing something inconvenient, not wrong. She sighed. Oh, Steve, you always take things so personally. You know how your aunt jokes. That wasn't a joke. She didn't mean it. Then why did you laugh? Her eyes flashed. Watch your tone, she snapped, her voice suddenly sharp. I just stared at her. It was incredible how fast she switched, from calm to condescending in the blink of an eye. It was the same tactic she'd used my entire life. Make me doubt myself, make me feel like I was overreacting. But this time, I didn't back down. I'm done, Mom, I said simply. I'm done paying for things, fixing things, pretending everything's fine when it isn't. She scoffed. Don't be ridiculous. Family helps family. Family doesn't laugh behind your back, I said. Family doesn't use you. The silence that followed was thick. For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes, maybe guilt, maybe fear. But then it hardened again. You're being dramatic, she said flatly. You're lucky to be in a position to help. Do you know how selfish you sound right now? After everything we've done for you. That last line almost made me laugh. Everything they'd done for me. As if emotional manipulation and constant guilt were acts of generosity. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just stepped aside and pointed toward the door. You should go, I said quietly. Her mouth fell open. Excuse me. I think we need some space. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she gave me this cold, almost pitying smile, the kind that said she still thought she was in control. You'll regret this, Steve. You'll come crawling back when you realize how much you need us. I didn't answer. I just closed the door behind her. After she left, I sat on the couch and stared at my phone again. Still full of missed calls, unread messages, voicemails. I didn't listen to a single one. Instead, I opened my laptop. I spent the rest of the day going through old transactions, bank transfers, payment records, messages, years of loans that were never repaid. I started making a list, item by item. Rent money, car repairs, utility bills, emergency cash. It added up fast, faster than I expected. By midnight, I had a spreadsheet with over $20,000 in family help that had never come back. Seeing it all laid out like that hit me hard. It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was the realization of how much time, energy, and emotional weight I'd poured into people who only saw me as a resource. That night, I made a decision. If they wanted to treat me like a bank, fine. But banks have rules. Interest. Consequences. The next morning, I blocked Clara and my mom from calling. I didn't block their numbers entirely, just calls, not texts. I wanted to see what they'd say when they couldn't hear my voice. The first few messages were desperate. Steve, please answer. This isn't funny. Your cousins can't do their schoolwork without internet. Your mother is upset. You know she worries about you. Then they shifted tone. Fine, if that's how you want to act. You're showing your true colors. You've changed. And finally, silence. Days passed. I kept to myself, worked, exercised, lived quietly. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells. The guilt faded. The peace stayed. Until the following week, when Clara showed up at my office. It was around 2 p.m. I was in the middle of reviewing a project when my coworker knocked on my door and said, "There's a woman here asking for you. Says she's your aunt." My stomach dropped. I walked out to the lobby, and there she was, Clara, standing by the reception desk with that same practiced, helpless expression. She smiled brightly when she saw me, as if nothing had happened. "Stevie," she said, walking toward me like we were old friends meeting for lunch. "You look so busy. I tried calling, but you must have missed my messages." I didn't smile. "What are you doing here, Aunt Clara?" She hesitated, lowering her voice slightly. "I just thought we could talk. You know, clear the air." I could feel the eyes of my coworkers behind the desk, pretending not to listen. I sighed and gestured toward a bench outside. Once we were seated, she got right to it. "Your mom's very worried about you," she started. "She says you've been acting strange lately." "I'm fine," I said evenly. She tilted her head. "Sweetheart, you've always been such a generous person. It's not like you to hold grudges." "I'm not holding a grudge," I said. "I'm setting boundaries." She forced a laugh. "Boundaries? Steve, we're family. You don't set boundaries with family. We help each other." I met her gaze. "I heard what you said about me." Her smile faltered. What? The phone call. You forgot to hang up. Her expression froze for a split second, but she recovered quickly. Oh, that, she said with a dismissive wave. That was just silly talk. You know how your mom and I joke when we're stressed. I didn't respond. I just looked at her, really looked. The fake smile, the careful tone, the way she avoided eye contact. She was nervous. Finally, I said, you'll figure out your bills. You always do. She blinked. Excuse me. I'm not helping you anymore. Her face hardened. You can't just, Steve, this isn't fair. We've always supported you. In what way? I asked quietly. That shut her up. We sat there for a long moment. She looked at me, probably realizing for the first time that I wasn't going to bend. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You're making a mistake, she said finally, standing up. You'll regret this. You'll see who really stands by you when things get tough. Then she turned and walked away. I watched her leave, my heart steady. I didn't feel guilty this time. I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. But as it turns out, cutting them off didn't end things. It only made them desperate. Because a few days later, I came home to something that told me they weren't done with me yet. When I pulled into my driveway that Friday evening, I noticed something strange right away. My front gate was slightly open. I always locked it when I left for work. Always. I lived alone, in a quiet neighborhood where everyone kept to themselves, so the sight immediately set off a quiet alarm in my head. I parked slowly, leaving the engine running for a moment as I looked around. Nothing seemed broken, and there were no signs of forced entry. But the gate. I knew I hadn't left it that way. I got out of the car, my footsteps crunching softly on the gravel. The air was cool and still, the kind of stillness that feels heavier than silence. When I reached the porch, I noticed muddy footprints near the door, small ones, probably from my aunt or my mom. My stomach sank. I unlocked the door carefully, half expecting to find something worse inside. And there it was, the faint smell of perfume. My mother's. The house looked the same at first glance, but I could tell someone had been there. The kitchen light was on, even though I'd turned it off that morning. A half-empty mug sat on the counter that wasn't mine. My mail, which I'd left in a neat pile, was scattered across the table. And then, right in the center, I saw it, a folded note. I didn't even have to open it to know who it was from. We came by to talk. You weren't answering, so we let ourselves in. We love you, and we're worried about you. Please stop acting like this. You're hurting the family. We'll be back tomorrow to make things right. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a name. The tone was unmistakably my mother's, gentle on the surface, sharp underneath. I stood there for a long time, staring at that note. The words looked innocent enough, but to me, they screamed control. It wasn't about love. It was about power, the power they felt slipping away. They had a key. Of course they did. I'd given it to my mom years ago in case of emergencies. I never thought she'd use it to break boundaries. But now, I realized that for her, there was no such thing as a boundary when it came to me. I changed the locks that night. The next morning, my phone started ringing at exactly 9 a.m. I ignored it. 5 minutes later, the ringing started again. Then again. I didn't answer a single call, but I watched the notifications pile up. By noon, I heard a car pull up outside. When I looked through the blinds, I saw both of them, my mom and Aunt Clara, standing in the driveway like they owned the place. I felt a cold, sinking feeling in my chest. They were dressed nicely, as if this was some sort of performance, like they'd planned to charm their way through the situation. My mom even had a basket in her hands, probably filled with muffins or something equally disarming. I stayed quiet, hoping they'd think I wasn't home. But after a minute, I heard my mom call out, "Steve, we just want to talk." Clara's voice followed. "We brought breakfast. We can't leave things like this." I stayed still. The doorbell rang once, twice. Then came the knocking, firm, rhythmic, persistent. "Steve, come on, sweetheart," my mom called again. "We're family. We can work this out." I didn't move. Finally, after a few minutes, I heard Clara sigh dramatically. "He's being ridiculous," she muttered, her voice clear even through the door. "He's really lost it." My mom whispered something I couldn't make out. Then there was silence, a long silence, followed by the sound of retreating footsteps and a car door closing. When I peeked through the window, I saw them sitting in the car, talking. My mom gestured toward the house, clearly frustrated. Clara looked equally annoyed. They sat there for a few minutes before finally driving away. I thought that was the end of it. But later that afternoon, I got an email from my workplace's HR department. At first, I thought it was a routine message, maybe about scheduling. But when I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was a report, a concern filed anonymously about my behavioral changes and possible family conflicts affecting my work performance. The message read, "A concerned family member contacted us to express worry about Steve's mental well-being and his recent isolation from loved ones. We wanted to check in to ensure everything is okay." I knew exactly who had done it. They weren't getting through to me personally, so they went for my job, the one part of my life they couldn't control before. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before walking down the hall to my manager's office. She looked surprised when I showed her the email. "Do you know who sent this?" she asked carefully. "I have a good idea," I said. "It's my mother or my aunt. Probably both." She frowned. "Is everything okay at home?" "It will be," I said. "I'm handling it." Thankfully, my manager trusted me. She could tell I wasn't unstable or distracted. Still, the embarrassment of having my private life dragged into my workplace stung. I left the office that day with a headache and a growing determination that this had gone far enough. When I got home, I found a voicemail waiting for me. It was Clara. Her voice was calm but measured, like she'd practiced what to say. "Steve, I don't know why you're being so cold. We're not your enemies. We just want to make sure you're okay. Your mom's been worried sick, and you're making things harder for her than they need to be. You've always been so kind, so understanding. Please don't throw that away over a misunderstanding." Then, after a pause, her tone shifted. "You know, people talk, Steve. If they think you've turned your back on your own family, that's not a good look for someone like you. Just think about that." That last line wasn't a plea, it was a warning. I sat there, listening to her words again and again. They weren't just trying to guilt me anymore. They were trying to make me afraid. But the thing about fear is that once you've seen through it, it loses its power. That night, I began gathering everything I needed: messages, bank statements, call logs, voice recordings. I wasn't sure what I was going to do yet, but I knew I needed proof of how far they'd gone. A few days later, I got my chance. My mother called from a different number, a new one. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Steve," she said, her voice calm and deliberate. "I'm not calling to argue. I just want to talk." I didn't say anything. After a pause, she continued, "You've hurt your aunt deeply. She feels like you've abandoned the family. You used to be so generous, and now you're acting like we're strangers. What happened to you?" "What happened," I said slowly, "is that I realized how you see me." "Oh, Steve," she sighed. "You're twisting everything. We love you. You know that." "No, you love what I can give you," I replied. There was silence. Then she said something that made my heart freeze. "If you keep this up, you'll regret it. I promise you that." She hung up before I could reply. That was the moment I stopped feeling conflicted. Whatever guilt had been clinging to me was gone. I finally saw them for what they really were. Not just manipulative, but entitled enough to believe they had a right to my peace of mind. 2 days later, Clara's electricity was shut off. Apparently, her unpaid bills had piled up, and without my help, the consequences had caught up to her. My mom called that evening, leaving a series of voicemails, alternating between anger, desperation, and something that almost sounded like panic. I didn't answer. I didn't even listen to them fully. But when I woke up the next morning, I found something new in my mailbox. A handwritten letter, this time from my mother. "You've made your point. Now please fix this. Clara is struggling, and so am I. We don't deserve this kind of treatment from you. You know better than to let families suffer. You're better than this." I held that letter for a long time. Then I set it down on my desk and smiled for the first time in weeks. Because they still didn't realize what was coming next. They thought I was just being stubborn. They had no idea that I was about to turn their own games against them. Carefully, quietly, and in a way that would leave them with nothing to say. When I woke up the next morning, the spreadsheet was still open on my laptop like a wound I couldn't stop examining. Seeing the numbers again before coffee felt almost clinical, not about anger so much as clarity. I slept on a plan that night and woke with the same calm I'd felt the first day I refused to transfer a cent. This was not going to be chaotic or impulsive. If they'd treated me like a machine for years, then I'd respond like a machine, precise, methodical, impossible to misread. Step 1. Documentation. I'd already started that. Bank transfers, dates, the little notes they'd left in the margins of texts. I saved voicemails, the recording of Clara and Mom laughing when they thought I wasn't listening, and every "oh, sweetheart" that had been weaponized to wear me down. I made copies, printed the most damning ones, and put them in a folder labeled Records. I also scanned the anonymous HR email and kept a log of anyone who'd watched Clara at my office entrance the day she'd shown up like a theater actress. Everything that proved pattern and intent went in that folder. Step 2. Witnesses. For so long, they'd controlled the narrative within our small circle, what the cousins were told, what neighbors saw. If I wanted to end it, I needed other people to know the truth. I reached out to a few relatives I trusted, distant aunts, an uncle who'd always been quietly kind, and asked them to meet for coffee. I didn't plead. I handed them a printout of a text thread where Clara had called me my personal ATM and my mother's message agreeing to let me feel important while they laughed. I watched their faces turn slowly from disbelief to a muted kind of pity. I didn't know. My uncle said finally, flipping a page. I always assumed you were helping because you wanted to. That's what they wanted you to think, I said. That's what they told everyone. You're doing the right thing, he said. If I'd known. That was enough. Their reactions didn't give me pleasure so much as validation. It meant the story could shift. If I could see doubt in enough people, their tools, guilt, and public performance would start to fail. Step 3. A formal demand. I visited a legal clinic and spoke with a paralegal about small claims procedures and drafting a repayment proposal. Not because I intended to ruin them with courts. I kept picturing my mother in a courtroom like some character in a show and didn't like the image, but because the paperwork would give weight to what I was asking. I had years of unpaid loans, and I was done letting polite generosity be an open tab. The paralegal helped me draft a clear, unemotional letter, dates, amounts, and a demand for repayment or an agreed installment plan, signed and notarized. It was businesslike. It removed emotion, which was the last thing they wanted. Step 4. Leverage. This was the part that felt like chess. They had used public shame against me before, telling neighbors a son had abandoned his parents, whispering to cousins that I'd changed. I needed to turn that engine back on them, but without stooping to their level of childish theatrics. I compiled an email and an envelope. The email went to my manager with the recording attached and a short note. I wanted to be transparent because it related to the earlier anonymous concern email. I asked HR to keep the recording on file should any action come up and to note that I had handled the situation responsibly and nonviolently. I didn't ask for sympathy. I asked for neutrality and a safe workplace. The envelope contained 3 things: the notarized repayment demand, a copy of the recording printed into a transcript with timestamps, and an invitation. Not a hostile one, a carefully worded invitation. We will meet at 7 p.m. on Saturday at my house. No shouting. I will present my records and the repayment proposal. If we cannot agree to terms, I will initiate small claims proceedings and share these records with other family members. If you prefer to sign the repayment plan privately and avoid public discussion, that option will remain open until Monday, 5 p.m. I left one copy in my mother's mailbox, another on Clara's car windshield, and hand-delivered one to my cousin Lydia with a quiet explanation. I wanted them to know this was not a bluff. Saturday came. I put on a shirt that wasn't new but wasn't worn out either, something neutral. I bought a loaf of bread and a small tray of coffee biscuits and set them on the coffee table. The house smelled of something ordinary, not the perfumed performance I'd found before. I wanted the scene to feel mundane, normal. People are more honest when things are ordinary. My mother arrived first, precisely 5 minutes late, clutching the basket she'd used to coax me before. Her face was schooled to concern. Clara followed, trailing nervous energy like a second shadow. They both expected theatrics. I could see it in the way Clara's eyes scanned the living room as if scouting for cameras. I stayed calm. I offered coffee. They took it like this was still a charade they could manage. I opened my folder. I laid the documents out slowly, carefully. The silence in the room was different from the silence that used to sit heavy on my shoulders. This silence was transparent. People can't bullfight paper. Before we start, I said, voice level, there's something I want to play. I hit play on my phone. The clip was short. Their voices from that morning, clear and laughing, clipped into a minute that sounded mild if you heard it out of context, but poisonous when you knew what it meant. No dramatics, no editorializing. Just them. Clara's smile dropped first. My mother's face went pale like a hand had pressed into it. The room stopped pretending. You should have just told me you felt that way, my mother said, breathless. This is private. It was private until you left it on, I replied. We're not doing guilt tonight. We're doing facts. I pushed the spreadsheet across the coffee table. This is everything I've helped with in the last 5 years. It's not accusations. It's records. They stared at the numbers. I watched the veins in Clara's neck work like a small, embarrassed animal. My mother's jaw ticked. I could almost hear the calculus running in their heads. Damage control, salvage reputation. Look for backup. They were used to being able to turn on the charm and have the world fold along with them. Why are you doing this? Clara asked finally, voice thin. Why not talk like an adult? We did try to talk, I said. I had a conversation when I realized I was being used. You both chose to make jokes and threats instead of fixing things. That left me with 2 options. Let it continue, or stop it and make sure it doesn't happen again. I slid the repayment document toward them. Sign this, and I'll set a realistic payment schedule. It includes a small interest rate to cover what it cost me to float your expenses. It also includes a clause. No surprise visits, no keys, and no HR complaints or visits to my workplace. Clara's shoulders rose. You can't expect us to sign that. I can expect you to take responsibility, I said. If you refuse, I'll file. I'll also send copies of the recording and the spreadsheet to the family group chat, to cousins, to the neighbors who have been polite about our family. You can keep pretending you're the victims. Or you can accept the terms and walk away with dignity. Dignity. I used the word because it stung. They'd sold it years ago. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then my mother laughed. A sharp, brittle sound. You're really going to blackmail us with your little spreadsheet? It's not blackmail. It's a record, I said. And you don't get to call it little when you've asked for tens of thousands over the years and called it loans on the phone. Clara's face contorted like she was trying to shape a lie that could hold. If you do that, if you send that to everyone, you'll ruin us. I'm done being scared of being accused of ruining you, I replied. You've been ruining me for years by taking whatever you wanted. They were shaking now, not the theatrical kind of shake I'd seen in my mom's voice before, an actual physical tremor. The mask of control finally slipping. They looked smaller in a way that made my chest uncomfortably tight and oddly relieved. For the first time since this all started, I saw them as people who had to choose. They could sign and accept terms that would limit their immediate chaos while still allowing them a way to repay. Or they could refuse and expose themselves to the consequences of their patterns, legal and social. Clara's hand hovered near the pen on the table. My mother was looking at her like she wanted the decision made for her. You're going to make us do this? Clara whispered. After everything? You made choices, I said. Now you have to live with them. The silence stretched. It wasn't the suffocating, manipulative quiet of my childhood. It was a clean pause, like a held breath before a plunge. Clara reached for the pen. Her fingers shook. She signed, slow and deliberate, as if tattooing her options onto paper. My mother signed next, each stroke leaving a little more color in her face. When they were done, they both sat back like someone who'd completed a marathon, exhausted, defiant, and a little hollowed out. I slid the folder closed. We'll notarize this on Monday, I said. I'll set up a payment plan you can afford. And one more thing. You will both write a short, honest note to the cousins and neighbors clarifying the situation. No gaslighting, no pleas, just the facts and an apology for any false narratives. Clara's eyes snapped up. You can't make us apologize. No, I said. I can't force you to feel remorse. But if you want me to consider not sending these records to every family member in the small claims court, then yes. An honest note is the minimal step towards showing you understand you did something wrong. They hesitated again. I could see the calculations. Preserve pride or preserve privacy. Pride, it seemed, was what they had left. Fine, my mother said finally, voice rough. We'll do it. I exhaled. Part of me wanted to celebrate. Part of me felt an odd melancholy. The ritualization of this conflict, the boxes and pins and signed documents, turning family into contracts. But there was also relief, a strange, domestic kind, the relief of boundaries finally respected. We agreed verbally on dates and amounts. We scheduled a notarization. I sent certified copies to myself and a trusted uncle. I did not send anything to the cousins yet. I wasn't cruel. I wanted them to face what they'd done first, not be publicly smeared. After they left, the house felt different. Not triumphant, just quieter, as if a constant, low-level storm had finally moved on. I sat at the table for a long time, listening to the kettle hiss on the stove, thinking about what had changed. I had not humiliated them publicly. I had made them choose responsibility in an unmistakable, legal way. The control they'd exerted for years had been answered with paperwork and witnesses and the slow, relentless logic of consequences. That night, I checked my phone. There were no messages from my mom or Clara beyond a curt, thank you, about the notarization time. No pleas, no apologies that felt sincere. Just signatures. That was enough for now. But as the week wore on and payments began according to the plan we'd signed, I noticed other things shifting. Quiet cousins calling me to check in, neighbors who'd been friendly at a distance offering small kindnesses, a few people who'd been silent finally, saying something supportive. The recording had not been leaked. The family group chat held off, likely due to the notes my mother and aunt had been forced to write. The small claims option hung in my pocket like an unused card, a sober reminder that I had the power to escalate if needed. Then, one evening, a message arrived from Lydia, my cousin. It was short. Uncle Tom told us everything. If you want, come to dinner Sunday. We want to hear your side. I read it twice. My thumb hovered over the reply. I thought about the signed papers, the payment schedule, the way the room had looked when they'd listened to themselves. I thought about the quiet that had finally settled in the house after they left. All right, I typed back. I'll be there. Sunday's dinner would be important. Not a spectacle, but another step. I wasn't naive. People love drama. But I had a plan. Keep slow, keep precise, and let consequences accumulate like proof. If they tried to gaslight again, I'd have witnesses, signatures, and records. If they tried to charm, I'd keep the ledger closed and walk away. And yet, even as I prepared for that dinner, I felt something else bubbling under the surface. Not triumph, exactly, but the recognition that this wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming the story of who I was in that family. It was about teaching them that generosity without boundaries becomes entitlement. Sunday came. The house hummed with the low conversations of cousins who'd been fed sanitized versions of what had happened. They smiled and asked about work, about mundane things, careful and curious. I answered plainly, then steered the conversation where it needed to go. I did not want a spectacle. I wanted clarity. Halfway through the meal, when the buttered potatoes were being passed and small talk had reached the polite plateau it often did at family meals, my uncle cleared his throat and said, "We've heard both sides. Steve has something he'd like to share." That was my cue. I stood, took a breath, and reached into my jacket for the envelope I'd kept for this very moment. I laid out two things on the table: a clean copy of the spreadsheet and the transcript of Clara and Mom's laugh, printed and time-stamped. Conversations stop the way the world does when someone stops turning a knob you didn't realize you were listening to. Heads turned. Lydia's eyes were wide and wet, not the performative kind I'd seen in my mother. She was angry, at them, not at me. Others murmured. The cousins, who had always been vaguely aware that I helped, a lot, suddenly had numbers that made the nebulous real. "People have a right to know," my uncle said softly. We all thought Steve just liked helping. He looked around at his siblings. His gaze landed on Mom and Clara in a way that felt like a verdict more than a question. My mother's face had a new line etched across it, the kind that looks like disappointment but is really marital pride bruised. She opened her mouth, started to speak, then closed it, the rehearsed lines evaporating in the face of printed proof. Clara's fingers dug into the tablecloth as if holding on. She tried to smile, tried to charm, but you can't charm paper into not existing. The air felt brittle and charged. I could have laid everything out then. The HR email, the notarized repayment, the plan I'd filed. I could have played the recording aloud again and watched reputations crumble. I could have demanded apologies, confessions, public humiliation. Instead, I did something quieter. I set the paperwork down and said, I asked them to sign a repayment plan. They did. They had a choice, and they made it. I met my cousin Lydia's eyes. I want you to know the truth, because if you don't, they'll keep controlling the story. I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for honesty. The cousins looked at each other, then at Mom and Clara. The atmosphere shifted from performance to assessment. My relatives were sorting evidence with the same careful patience I'd used all week. It was not theatrical. It was final. That night, when I walked home, I felt an unfamiliar steadiness. The revenge I'd wanted was never loud or vindictive. It was practical, boundaries enforced, lies documented, choices made visible. It felt like closing a chapter in pencil rather than smashing it with a hammer. Still, as I turned the key in my new locks, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. They had signed. They would pay. But habits are stubborn. People who spent decades relying on others don't learn overnight. I'd won a battle of wills, not a complete transformation of hearts. And as I climbed the stairs to my apartment, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. A notification from an unknown email showed a single line. We received your files. Are you sure you want them shared with the wider family? The cursor blinked under those words, like a question hanging in the dark. I read it again, then smiled the small, private smile of someone who knows both the weight and the worth of what they hold. I typed one word and hit send. After I hit send, I felt an odd calm settle over me. It wasn't satisfaction in a petty sense. It was the weight of clarity finally landing where it belonged. For years, my mother and Aunt Clara had operated in a comfortable bubble of entitlement, thinking they could demand, manipulate, and gaslight without any real accountability. That bubble had just popped, and now the air around them was thin and cold. The next morning, my phone blew up with messages. Not calls. They were too smart, or maybe too scared, to call. Instead, texts, emails, even group messages that had been quietly forwarded. Their tone changed quickly from concern to panic. Clara's first text came in. Steve, what did you do? Then my mother's. Steve, this is getting out of hand. Please, you can't be serious. I didn't respond. I let the messages pile up. By the end of the day, almost every cousin, aunt, and uncle had received the documentation. Screenshots of the recordings, transcripts, the spreadsheet with the payments and unpaid debts. All of it went to everyone who had ever been influenced by my mother and Clara's version of the story. Within hours, the whispers started. People were calling my mother and Clara privately, asking questions. Is this true? Why didn't you ever mention this before? Have you been manipulating Steve for years? The network they had carefully cultivated to support their lies was collapsing like a house of cards. I didn't need to say anything. I didn't need to defend myself. The documents spoke for themselves. The pattern was clear. And for the first time in decades, I was free of the pressure to justify, excuse, or ignore their behavior. A few days later, I received a call from Clara. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was frantic, clipped, and even now, calculated. Steve, we're going to fix this. We'll pay what you want. Please, just don't involve anyone else. Your cousins, the neighbors, it's all a misunderstanding. We'll make it right. I didn't respond. I listened to it once, then deleted it. By the end of that week, my mother and Clara were in full damage control mode. They paid off bills that had been ignored for months, reinstated their internet, and even repaid a portion of the debts I'd listed. The legal way this time, with bank transfers I could track. But it wasn't graceful. Their apologies were absent. Instead, their messages were full of careful, cold calculations. They were paying to stop the leaks and regain a sliver of control, not because they felt remorse. At family gatherings after that, the dynamic was completely different. My cousins looked at me differently, with respect and awareness. My mother and Clara's charm and theatrics were stripped bare. The same smiles that used to hold menace now looked brittle, forced. I didn't need to participate in their games anymore. They had been exposed. Their lies, manipulations, and entitlement were visible to anyone paying attention. I stayed polite but distant. I answered questions succinctly, never elaborated. The power had shifted quietly but completely. If they tried to manipulate again, I had the records, the witnesses, and a reputation that now carried proof rather than assumptions. Months later, the repayment schedule was fully tracked and verified. My mother and Clara were technically compliant, but the look on their faces when I mentioned upcoming installments reminded me daily who had been in control for years and who was finally answering for it. They were still the same people, entitled, manipulative, and relentless in their self-interest. But now every move was scrutinized, every claim questioned, and every attempt at guilt nullified by cold, hard evidence. I didn't forgive them. I didn't reconcile. I didn't pretend that hugs and polite conversation would erase years of manipulation. They had shown who they truly were, and the world, my family, my workplace, my neighbors, now knew it too. Their laughter, the "he'll always say yes" lines, the thinly veiled threats, all of it had been cataloged and exposed. Life returned to a quieter rhythm. I was finally free to live without the constant undercurrent of their control. I didn't have to answer late-night calls demanding money or compliance. I didn't have to excuse their lies to others. The house felt lighter, the streets calmer, and my mornings unpressured. Moments of reflection reminded me that this wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about boundaries, documentation, and exposure. I had created a system where entitlement could not operate unchecked. And the most satisfying part wasn't the money recovered or the documents sent. It was watching them adjust to life without the power they had always assumed was theirs. In the end, the situation was simple but definitive. Clara and my mother had paid what they owed according to the formalized plan. My reputation among family and colleagues was intact, strengthened by transparency and evidence. My cousins and relatives saw the truth for themselves, leaving my mother and Clara isolated in their entitlement. And I, finally, had control over my life, my finances, and my peace of mind. They remained villains in the story, entitled and manipulative to the core, but powerless now in ways they had never experienced before. And I, for the first time, was no longer a pawn in their games. The lesson was clear. Generosity without boundaries invites exploitation, and accountability, when delivered carefully and deliberately, can be the quietest, most devastating form of revenge. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. My name's Troy, and I never thought I'd be that guy posting on Reddit about family drama. But after what happened this summer, I honestly don't know how else to process it. It's one of those things that starts small, little comments, little exclusions, and before you know it, you're sitting in your car with your wife in tears beside you, wondering how your own family could treat you like this. To set the scene, my parents, Greg and Lorna, own a family cabin by a lake about 2 hours from where I live. It's been in the family for years, passed down from my grandfather. Growing up, we spent every summer there, swimming, fishing, grilling marshmallows at night. It was the one place that always felt peaceful. Or, at least, it used to. Everything started shifting about 2 years ago when my older brother, Eric, got divorced. He and his 2 kids started spending every free weekend at the cabin. My parents, especially my mom, were thrilled. She always had a soft spot for Eric, the responsible one. According to her, he could do no wrong, even when he was clearly the one causing the problem. Meanwhile, I had gotten married to my wife, Jenna, around the same time. Jenna's amazing, kind, grounded, and the type of person who tries to make everyone feel comfortable. She really tried with my family. She baked for holidays, sent thoughtful gifts, remembered birthdays, all that. But no matter what she did, my mom acted like she was intruding. When we first got married, my mom actually told me, "It'll take me time to get used to sharing you, Troy." That comment stuck with me. Sharing me? Like I was some sort of possession. Anyway, every summer, my parents organize what they call the Family Cabin Week. It's supposed to be for everyone. Me, Eric, my parents, and our families. We rotate who gets which room. Everyone pitches in for groceries, and it's usually a nice break. But this year, things started off weird. A few weeks before the trip, I called my mom to confirm our dates. I wanted to make sure I'd booked the time off work, and I figured we could bring extra supplies since Jenna likes to cook big meals for everyone. When I mentioned that, my mom went quiet for a second, then said, "Oh, sweetie, about that. We actually weren't sure if you two were coming this year." I remember blinking, thinking I must have misheard her. "What do you mean? We always come." "Well," she started, in that tone she uses when she's pretending to be gentle but really isn't. "Eric and the kids are going up earlier this year, and they'll be using the main cabin. We just thought maybe Jenna wouldn't feel very comfortable with all the chaos. You know how loud the kids get." That was her excuse. That Jenna wouldn't feel comfortable. I tried to stay calm. "Mom, we're fine with the kids. We've shared the space before. Why didn't anyone tell me earlier?" "It just worked out this way," she said quickly. "Don't make a big deal out of it. You can always come another time." I hung up, pretending I wasn't as hurt as I was. When I told Jenna, she looked down and said quietly, "I told you they didn't like me." That hit hard. 2 days later, my mom posted a bunch of photos on Facebook, Eric, the kids, and my parents sitting around the campfire at our family cabin, smiling. Marshmallows. The same fire pit where Jenna and I had made esmores the year before. No invite. No message. Nothing. I didn't comment, but I saw that my dad's account, one he shares with my mom, was being used to manage cabin rentals. They rent out parts of the property to tourists on weekends to cover maintenance costs. That same night, while Jenna was asleep beside me, I sat staring at the screen, scrolling through booking after booking. I'd helped Dad set up the system years ago. I still knew the passwords. That's when a thought crossed my mind. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was more about fairness. They were excluding us from a place that was supposed to belong to everyone. So I logged in. And when I saw the names of the people renting for the rest of the month, bookings under Eric's name, family friends, even one listed as Lorna's guest, something inside me just snapped. I stared at the cancel booking button for a long time before clicking it. One, then another, then another. Every single rental gone. Each one triggered an automatic refund. And because the PayPal account was still connected to my card from when I helped my dad set it up 3 years ago, the money flowed straight back to me. At first, it didn't even feel real. I just sat there, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, wondering if I'd gone too far. But then I saw another post, this time a story from Eric's account, of everyone at the lake again, captioned, "Family time, the best time." That did it. 10 minutes later, my phone started buzzing. Over and over. "Eric." When I finally answered, he didn't even let me speak. "You just ruined everything," he shouted. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I leaned back in my chair, trying to sound calm. "I fixed it," I said. "The cabin's supposed to be for everyone, remember?" He went silent for a few seconds before saying, "You're unbelievable. Mom and Dad are furious. You think this makes you look good. I think it makes things fair," I replied. There was another pause. Then he said in this low, angry voice, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." And before I could say anything else, he hung up. When I woke up the next morning, I honestly thought maybe the whole thing had been a dream. The sun was streaming through the curtains. The air smelled faintly of coffee. Jenna must have already started a pot. And for a second, everything felt peaceful again. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom. "Mom, we need to talk. I'm on my way." No greeting, no explanation. Just that. I stared at it for a long time, feeling my stomach tighten. My mom has always had a way of turning any situation around to make herself the victim. Whenever there was conflict, she'd show up uninvited, act like she was trying to make peace. And by the end of it, I'd be the one apologizing. It was a pattern that had repeated itself my whole life, and every time, I promised myself it'd be the last. Jenna came out of the kitchen with 2 mugs of coffee. She must have seen my expression because she set them down slowly and asked, "What happened?" I showed her the message. She didn't say anything at first, just sighed, rubbing her temples. "She's really coming here?" I nodded. "Apparently. Do you want me to stay?" she asked softly. "Of course I do," I said. "This involves both of us." She hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Okay, then I'll be right here." We sat together on the couch, sipping our coffee in silence, the tension thick in the room. It didn't take long for the familiar sound of my mom's old silver sedan to pull into the driveway. Through the window, I watched her step out, wearing a pressed floral blouse and that same expression she always wore before a confrontation. Tight smile, chin high, as if she were already preparing her lines for the argument. The knock came sharp and quick. When I opened the door, she didn't even wait for an invitation. She brushed past me with her purse tucked tightly under her arm, glancing around like she was taking inventory of our living room. "So this is where all that cabin refund money went," she said, half joking, but not really. "Good morning to you too," I replied, shutting the door. She sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and gave Jenna a brief, polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Jenna, dear, I wasn't expecting to see you this early." Jenna, calm as ever, said, "It's our house. Why wouldn't I be here?" That made my mom purse her lips. "Of course. I just meant, well, never mind. Let's talk about what happened, Troy." I sat across from her, bracing myself. "You mean the bookings?" "Yes, the bookings." Her tone sharpened immediately. "Your father and I had everything organized. The rental income was helping cover the property taxes, and you went behind our backs and canceled every single one. People were furious. Your brother had guests coming this weekend." I leaned forward slightly. "Guests he didn't even ask me about. Guests staying in a cabin that belongs to the whole family." "It's not that simple," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Eric has been handling most of the upkeep. He's there all the time. You hardly go anymore, and when you do, it feels different. You and Jenna don't really fit in with how things are now." There it was again. "You don't fit in." I felt my jaw tighten. "Different how?" My mom hesitated. "Jenna's just particular. She doesn't like the noise, or the bugs, or the way we do things. I don't want her feeling uncomfortable." Before I could respond, Jenna spoke up. Her voice was steady, but there was a quiet hurt underneath it. "Lorna, I've never said that. I actually like going there. I always helped cook and clean, and I never complained." My mom gave her a tight smile. "Oh, I didn't mean it like that, dear. It's just, some people aren't used to that kind of rustic lifestyle." I could see Jenna's shoulders stiffen. That's how my mom worked. Every insult wrapped in politeness. Every criticism disguised as concern. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "This isn't about Jenna or bugs or anything else. It's about being left out. You told me the cabin was for everyone. Then you took that back because Eric wanted it all to himself." "It's not about taking it back," she said quickly. "It's about practicality. You live far away. You don't use it much, Eric does. Why shouldn't the person who actually takes care of it have a little priority?" I leaned back, shaking my head slowly. "Because that's not how family works. Grandpa left that place for all of us, not just for whoever shows up the most." For a moment, my mom's confident posture faltered. Then she crossed her arms and said, "Well, you can thank your little stunt for making things much harder on us. The rental money was going toward fixing the roof. You've just cost us thousands." "I didn't cost you anything," I said quietly. "I just reminded you whose names are on the deed." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You went through Dad's account, didn't you?" "Without asking. I set that account up for him," I said. "And yes, it's still linked to my card. I didn't steal anything. I just reclaimed what's partly mine." For a few seconds, she didn't speak. The room felt heavy, like the air had thickened. Then she stood up slowly and adjusted her purse strap. "I hope you realize what you've started, Troy," she said. "You think this is about fairness, but all you've done is drive a wedge through this family." "The wedge was already there," I replied. Her expression hardened. "Eric was right. You've changed." She turned to leave, but Jenna's voice stopped her at the door. "Lorna," she said softly, "you know what hurts the most? We didn't even get a call. Not one. You could have told us the truth. that you wanted Eric to have the cabin for himself. But instead, you lied to make it sound like you were protecting my feelings. My mom didn't turn around. I was protecting what's left of this family, she said coldly. Then she walked out, closing the door behind her with a soft but deliberate click. The silence that followed was suffocating. Jenna sank onto the couch, running her hands over her face. She's never going to admit she's wrong, is she? No, I said. She never does. I walked to the window and watched her car pull away. My chest felt tight, but beneath the hurt, something else was building, resolve. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. I went to work, kept my head down, and tried to focus. But that tension lingered, like the calm before a storm. Then, on Thursday evening, I got an email. It was from the rental platform, notifying me that someone had tried to change the payment method on the cabin's account. The name listed? Eric Matthews. I sat staring at the screen, my heart thudding. They were trying to lock me out. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Dad. Dad, your mom says there's been a misunderstanding. Let's talk this weekend at the cabin. Just us. No Jenna. I read it twice. Then again. No Jenna. The message might as well have said everything they truly thought. When Jenna came into the room and saw my expression, she asked quietly, "What did they say?" I showed her the text. She stared at it for a long time before whispering, "You're not going alone, are you?" I hesitated. "I don't want you getting dragged into this any deeper." "Troy, it already involves me," she said. "They've made that clear." That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about how my family had twisted something that used to be beautiful into a battlefield. I remembered the laughter from years ago, the late nights fishing with my dad, the smell of pine, the sound of my mom humming while cooking breakfast on the porch. Now it all felt tainted, but a part of me still wanted to hear what Dad had to say. He'd been quiet through most of this. Too quiet. If anyone could make sense of it, maybe it was him. So the next morning, I packed a small bag and drove to the cabin. The road felt longer than usual, the trees darker, the air heavier. When I finally pulled into the gravel driveway, Eric's truck was already there, and standing beside it, arms crossed, was my brother. He wasn't smiling. "Took you long enough," he said as I stepped out of the car. I looked past him toward the cabin, where I saw my parents standing on the porch together. My mom's expression was unreadable. My dad looked tired. Eric took a step closer. "You think you're clever, huh? You embarrassed us. You ruined everything we worked for." I didn't answer. I just walked past him toward the porch. My dad sighed heavily when he saw me. "Troy, I wish you hadn't done what you did. I wish you hadn't let this get so far," I said quietly. We stood there for a moment, no one speaking. The lake shimmered behind them, calm and blue. But in that stillness, I could feel the storm building, an argument that had been years in the making, about loyalty, money, and the illusion of family fairness. My mom was the one who broke the silence. "Well," she said, her voice firm and final, "since you've made it clear you don't respect this family anymore, we've made a decision." I looked at her warily. "What decision?" Eric smirked slightly. "We're changing the ownership arrangement." I stood there on the porch, the boards creaking faintly under my shoes, feeling the weight of what my mom had just said sink in. Changing the ownership arrangement. Those 4 words hit harder than I expected. My father avoided my eyes, his hands stuffed deep in his jacket pockets. My mom stood tall beside him, chin lifted, like she was about to deliver a speech she'd rehearsed 100 times. "What do you mean, changing it?" I asked carefully. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. My mom clasped her hands together. "Your father and I have been talking," she began, "and we realized that the current setup isn't fair. The cabin has become a financial burden, and it's really Eric who's been taking care of everything: repairs, cleaning, the rental management. It doesn't make sense for you to still have an equal share when you barely contribute." There it was. The real motive, dressed up in logic and reason. I felt my jaw tighten. "Barely contribute?" "Mom, I helped replace the dock 2 summers ago. I paid for the new water pump. I set up the rental system that's been bringing in money every month." She waved a dismissive hand, as if all of that were irrelevant. "You helped once or twice, dear. But you have to admit, you're not as involved as Eric." Eric smirked slightly, leaning against the railing. It's just reality, Troy. You've got your own life now. We're not trying to cut you out, but we need something that reflects how things really are. I turned to my father. And you agree with this? He sighed deeply, still not meeting my gaze. Your mother makes some valid points. The taxes have gone up, and if Eric is doing most of the work, maybe it's time to adjust things. We were thinking we could buy out your share, just to simplify ownership. It'll be easier for everyone. I stared at them, disbelief rising in my chest. Buy out my share? With what money? The money I just refunded from my card. My mom stiffened. That money was for maintenance, not your personal use. You had no right to touch it. I had every right, I said firmly. You left my name on the account for a reason. If you didn't want me involved, you should have removed me years ago. My dad finally looked at me, his expression tired but stern. You're making this harder than it has to be, son. We're offering a fair deal. Take the payout. Let Eric handle things from now on. It's not about sides. It's about practicality. Practicality, I repeated slowly. Right. There was a long silence. The only sound was the soft lap of water against the shore. My hands were shaking slightly, though not from fear, more from anger that I was trying hard to keep contained. You really think I'm just going to walk away? I said. That you can erase me from this like I was never part of it? My mom crossed her arms. No one is erasing you. We're just moving forward in a way that makes sense. You've changed, Troy. Ever since you married Jenna, you've been distant. You don't call, you don't visit. I cut her off. Mom, I stopped visiting because you made Jenna feel unwelcome every single time. You didn't want her here. You didn't even invite us this summer. And now you're pretending this is about taxes. Eric stepped forward. You're twisting things. Mom and Dad have always tried to include you, but you've been acting like we're out to get you. Maybe if you hadn't overreacted and canceled the rentals, we wouldn't be here. I turned to him. You mean the rentals you put under your name? The ones that were never discussed with me or Dad? Yeah, Eric, that's real family teamwork. He took a step closer, his expression darkening. You're lucky Mom and Dad are even offering you a payout. If it were up to me, I'd tell you to forget it altogether. That's enough, my dad said sharply. But Eric just shrugged, his tone dripping with false calm. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. My mom sighed, pretending to sound weary and reasonable. Let's not make this ugly. Troy, you've always been so sensitive about fairness. So here's your chance to be practical. Take the offer, move on, and we can all start fresh. I looked at each of them in turn. My father's tired resignation, my mother's cold certainty, Eric's smug half-smile. It all hit me like a punch to the gut. They really thought I'd give up that easily. What if I don't agree? I asked quietly. My mom gave a little sigh, the kind she used to give when I was a teenager refusing to follow her rules. Then I suppose we'll have to take the next step. We've already spoken to a lawyer about possible restructuring. I felt my pulse quicken. You what? My dad raised his hands in a half-hearted gesture. It's not finalized, Troy. We just wanted to know what our options were. Options, I repeated, meaning how to push me out legally. No one answered. That silence told me everything I needed to know. For a long moment, none of us spoke. I stared out toward the lake, the same lake where I'd learned to swim, where Dad had taught me how to bait a hook, where we'd spent countless evenings sitting on the dock talking about nothing and everything. Now it all felt hollow. Finally, I said, fine. If you want to make this about paperwork, then so be it. But you'd better check the documents before you go to that lawyer. My mom frowned. What's that supposed to mean? I met her gaze. It means the deed isn't as simple as you think. Her expression shifted slightly, but before she could respond, I turned toward my car. You've made your intentions clear. I'll be in touch. Troy, my dad called out, his voice uncertain. Don't make this worse than it is. I stopped and looked back. It's already worse than it ever should have been. Then I got in my car and drove off. The ride home felt endless. My mind replayed every word, every glance, every tiny detail. They had planned this, carefully, quietly, believing I'd just comply. But the thing they'd forgotten was that Grandpa's original ownership document wasn't the same as the one they'd been using for years. When Grandpa passed away, he left the cabin to all of us jointly. However, before it was transferred into my parents' names, I had helped with some legal paperwork. Back when I was studying business, and still working at a law firm as an assistant. My father had asked me to handle the registration process. At the time, none of us realized how significant that would become. That's when I remembered something. A clause in the ownership agreement that I had insisted on adding. One that required unanimous consent from all heirs before any changes could be made to the property or its ownership. It had been my idea after hearing stories of families torn apart by exactly this kind of dispute. My parents hadn't objected then. They probably didn't even remember. But I did. When I got home, Jenna was waiting on the porch. She could tell just by my face that things hadn't gone well. "What happened?" she asked quietly. I told her everything. The proposal to buy me out, the talk about lawyers, the threat to change ownership. As I spoke, her expression went from disbelief to sadness, then finally to quiet resolve. "So they really mean to cut you out," she said softly. "They think they can," I replied. "But they can't. Not without me signing off." Jenna nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time they learn that." That night, I went through my old files. Sure enough, buried in an old folder, I found a scanned copy of the original deed and the notarized agreement. The clause was still there, clear as day. No changes to ownership without all parties' written consent. I stared at that line for a long time, feeling both angry and vindicated. They thought they had all the power. They didn't realize they'd built their plan on a foundation they couldn't touch. Still, I didn't rush into anything. I knew how my family operated. They thrived on drama, on playing the victim. If I struck too soon, they'd twist the narrative. I had to be smart, patient, and calm. The next few days were quiet, but I could sense the tension building. Eric sent me a few vague messages. Nothing directly threatening, just things like, "You're making this harder than it needs to be," and "You could still fix this if you wanted." Then one evening, my father called. His tone was subdued, almost weary. "Son, can we talk?" he asked. "About what?" I said, though I already knew. "About the cabin," he said. "Your mother's really upset. We don't want this to turn into something ugly. Maybe you can come over tomorrow night? We'll all sit down together. No yelling, no accusations." I hesitated. "Will Eric be there?" "Yes," he said softly. "But I'll make sure things stay civil." Civil, that was never a word that lasted long in my family. Still, part of me wanted to face them again, if only to make it clear that I wasn't backing down. So I agreed. As I hung up, Jenna touched my arm. "You're sure about this?" "Yeah," I said quietly, "because I think it's time they heard the truth." I told them I'd come to the meeting because I wanted to be reasonable. That was a lie. I wanted to be strategic. After I got home and found the deed clause, I slept about 2 hours total that night. Not because I was anxious about a legal fight, though that was possible, but because every element of my childhood that my parents had slowly turned into a commodity felt suddenly reclaimable. That cabin had been a refuge. They'd turned it into a ledger. The next morning, I started quietly. First, I made copies, high-quality scans, of every document I could find. The original deed, the notarized unanimous consent clause, the receipts for every repair I'd paid for, emails where Dad thanked me for setting up the rental account, even the messages where Mom had said, in her typical passive voice, that Eric helps so much with the cabin. Little things. Paper trails. Facts. Then I called someone I knew would be useful. Mara, an old family friend who runs a local bed and breakfast and knows every municipal code and neighbor in a 30-mile radius. Mara owes me a favor from when I helped her get a permit for a renovation. She picked up on the first ring. "Troy," she said, surprised. "Everything okay?" "Your mom called." She sounded off. "That's why I'm calling you," I said. I kept my voice light, like it was nothing. "I need to put a stop to something before it becomes a bigger story. Can you come up to the cabin this weekend? Bring a copy of the town's easement and any paperwork you have on historic properties. Also, be casual. Can you bring Benny from the hardware store? He knows the roof history." She hesitated, then laughed. "Only you would ask for Benny for moral support." "Yeah, I'll come. Want me to bring pie?" I smiled, even though she couldn't see me. "Bring the pie." Hearing the word pie made it all feel strangely ordinary, which was helpful. Revenge, I decided, didn't have to be theatrical. It should be effective, and it should make them look like what they were: petty, entitled, and hypocritical. Over the next 48 hours, I moved like someone executing a quiet, domestic campaign. I texted my uncle, Dad's brother, who'd always been skeptical of how Mom favored Eric. He promised to come to the meeting as moral support. I messaged a few cousins I knew would show up for family drama. They didn't ask for details, just a time and a promise of coffee. I called Tom, the town notary who'd helped me pull signatures on some paperwork a few years back. He agreed to stop by and witness anything we needed. I also messaged two neighbors, people who knew the cabin's history and would corroborate anything about the rental disturbances. Most importantly, I quietly reinstated a few weekend bookings on the rental platform, but not for strangers. I booked them under names of family friends who supported me, and I set them for the weekend Mom and Eric had been planning to have the cabin to themselves. The platform emails went to the account Dad and Mom shared, but the bookings were non-refundable and confirmed. That would buy me time, or at least anxiety. Jenna was my co-conspirator from the start, whether she liked it or not. She didn't go for loud theatrics. Her revenge style was kitchen sans violence. She planned food, logistics, and optics. If you want people on your side, she said, make it look warm. Make it look like they're the ones being dramatic. She arranged for her sister, who's a quietly persuasive teacher, to bring a stack of home-baked muffins and to sit between Dad and Mom in a way that would make confrontation look ridiculous. She printed out copies of the deed and slid them into a neat folder labeled Family Documents. The folder seemed small and calm, the exact opposite of the chaos brewing behind it. When the day of the meeting came, I drove up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since my college debate team days. The sky was clear, the lake was glassy, and the air smelled like cut grass and diesel from the boat motors, normal things that used to soothe me. They no longer did. I pulled into the driveway and noticed Eric's truck already there, as expected. Dad's pickup was next to it, but there were a surprising number of other cars scattered along the gravel, a few that weren't ours. I parked, trying not to look too surprised. As I walked toward the porch, I saw my Aunt June standing by the rail, her arms folded but her mouth a small, tight line of solidarity. Beside her, Tom the notary was fiddling with his phone. Mara walked up behind them carrying a pie tin and a thermos. My mom looked ready for battle. She had her practiced neutral face on, the one she uses when she thinks she's being magnanimous. Dad's jaw was set in a way I'd never seen it before, like he had sand in his teeth. They greeted me with the clipped civility of people about to perform a ritual. But when Mom noticed the extra cars, her eyes flicked once toward the line of people and then to me. That was the moment gratitude and fury collided in her expression. She blinked fast, and for a second I caught a look of something like fear. Good, she said. Seems you brought company. Family, I said, and a few friends. I handed Dad the folder with the deeds. He took it with a puzzled look. We sat down on the porch, the usual wide semicircle of mismatched chairs. Jenna and her sister took a seat together, the muffins between them. I sat opposite my parents, and the mood felt heavy and taut. My mom started, voice polished and measured. We asked you to come because we thought, well, to try and resolve things. We don't want this to turn into a spectacle. I smiled slow and calm. Neither do I. That's why I invited Tom. I gestured. Tom stood and placed a small leather case on the table, the notary's stamp peeking out. There's something important we need to make clear before any talk of lawyers or buyouts happens. Dad sighed. Troy, we were trying to give you a fair offer. We wanted to avoid court. A fair offer from the people who tried to lock me out. I asked. I don't see how that's fair. My mom's eyes narrowed. Enough. Don't make this personal. You canceled our bookings. How was I supposed to explain that to paying guests? You explained it by posting photos, I said calmly. You didn't call us. You didn't send a text. You put up a smiling family photo on Facebook like none of this was happening. You decided for us. Murmurs ran around the porch. Aunt June let out a small, displeased sound. A neighbor cleared his throat. I could feel the balance shifting. I asked Tom to open my folder. With a steady hand, he spread out the deed and pointed to the clause about unanimous consent. He read it aloud, formally. No transfers, changes of ownership, or sale shall be effected without the written and notarized consent of all named heirs. Mom's face went white for a sliver of a second. Then she smiled, that practiced armor, and tried to take it in stride. I wasn't aware of that clause, she said too slowly. If it exists, of course we'll respect it. Of course, I said. We should also respect the spirit. I tapped the folder. Grandpa left that place for all of us. He wanted it to be the thing that kept us together. That means usage, care, and decisions require all of us. Someone in the back, my cousin Marla, who'd always been sensitive to fairness, spoke up. You can't just decide to privatize it because your kid acts as property manager. That's not how family works. Eric jabbed a finger toward me. You're playing a game. You canceled bookings and refunded people. That cost us. So, I said slowly, tell me which of those people you think I personally hurt. The strangers who booked? The guests who were turned away? Or the family who thought they could manipulate a generational gift? My dad's shoulders slumped. For the first time, he looked small. We were trying to do what we thought was best, he began. Best for whom? I asked. Because it wasn't best for everyone. At that, Mom's patience snapped. She rose from her chair in a carefully controlled movement. Are you really going to make this about moral high ground, Troy? After what you did, you humiliated us. You embarrassed your brother. I didn't embarrass anyone, I said quietly. I made the cabin available to those who love it. I gave people a place to come who weren't complicit in excluding my wife and me. That's when Jenna stood. She was usually quiet in family fights. She hates being the spectacle. But something in her voice had steel. You left us out. You didn't even call. You sat around a fire at a place you know means something to me and my husband and pretended everything was fine. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice. I saw the color drain from Mom's face. For the first time all week, she looked startled, real human startled, not stage managed. Her mouth opened and closed, searching for a phrase that could put this back into her favor. While she fumbled, my Aunt June, who'd been quiet until now, went to the car and came back with a handful of printed emails and screenshots. She tossed them onto the table like a gavel. The messages were small. My mom confirming bookings under Eric's name, volunteers discussing exclusive weekend plans, a forwarded message from a neighbor who'd been asked to keep quiet about the family's private weekend. The porch turned into something like a courtroom. People who'd been peripheral now gave firm nods. Tom the notary took a seat and watched like someone presiding over a civil ceremony that had gone sideways. Eric tried to bluff, a practiced look, but he was losing the room. This is ridiculous. We were just trying to keep things simple. We didn't mean to be cruel. You were cruel by omission, I said. That matters. He sputtered, and in that sputter was the kernel of a deeper confession. He'd wanted the cabin to be his base of operations, his place to build influence, to host friends, to keep the business of his life humming without the inconvenience of dissenting family voices. He had turned the cabin into a tool. At that point, the dynamic shifted from legal to moral, and morality is a dangerous place for manipulators. People who'd come expecting a quiet, private meeting found themselves faced with pattern and proof. The neighbors who'd been corralled into silence sat up straighter. Uncle Greg, Dad's brother, spoke in a low voice about fairness and the memory of Grandpa spending summers teaching kids to fish. My father's eyes finally found mine. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical work. Troy, he said, voice small. We don't want to fight. I don't either, I said. I want everyone to enjoy what Grandpa left us. I want the cabin to be a place for family, not a ledger where the loudest gets the most. I want my wife to feel welcome. At the very least, we can agree to a usage schedule that allows everyone fair time. And if repairs or taxes are an issue, we handle them together. No unilateral decisions. No secret bookings under one name. Mom opened her mouth, closed it. Eric's jaw worked. For a moment, it looked like we might reach some forced, brittle compromise. But that's when Eric made the mistake. You think this little meeting is going to change things? He sneered, louder than anyone expected. You think your friends and your little folder and your notary will stop us? We can go to a lawyer tomorrow. We can start the paperwork. See how long that clause keeps you in. Silence fell. The people who'd backed me looked at Eric the way you look at a dog that's about to bite the hand that fed it. My dad's face went from tired to ashamed. I stood up slowly. feeling the place crank open inside me where resolve lived. "If you want to go to a lawyer," I said, "then go. But if you do, you'll be making this public." Eric laughed. "Public? And what will the public care about? A family squabble. They'll care about hypocrisy," I said. "They'll care about how you used a place Grandpa left to bring your friends and make a profit while excluding his own family. They'll care about the way you treat people who aren't convenient to you. And they'll care about the post you made showing you all so happy while you decided who gets to be family." I could see the blood drain from Mom's face. She realized what I was implying. There were messages, photos, a paper trail that, if presented to the community or even the rental site, would not make them look good. That's when my final piece of quiet revenge came together, the one I hadn't told anyone about. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened the rental platform. I scrolled to the weekend Eric had hoped to monopolize and hit a button that would send an automatic confirmation to the renters I'd booked earlier. Then I opened my social media app and scheduled a post, carefully worded, calm, without malice, inviting extended family and neighbors to a family celebration, honoring Grandpa's cabin on the day Eric had been planning to be exclusive. The post included a photo of Grandpa, the deed clause, and a line about how family gifts aren't for privatization. I felt like a petty kingpin for a second. The bookings were non-refundable. The post sent notifications to a small circle of people who immediately responded with comments. How sorry they were to hear about the exclusion, how they'd love to come, how they remember Grandpa's kindness. The momentum built like small stones rolling into an avalanche. Mom's face went from pale to red to a strange, furious gray. She grabbed for her purse. "You'll regret this," she said, voice small but fierce. "Maybe," I said, "but regret isn't what I'm betting on. I'm betting on people choosing to be decent." There was a flurry of cars along the drive within the hour. My aunt's old station wagon, Mara's little B&B van, a neighbor with a trailer of kayaks. Someone had brought folding chairs. Someone else had printed out a faded picture of Grandpa with the caption, "For everyone." I could see neighbors offering to bring supplies. The porch filled with voices that weren't manipulation. They were warmth, genuine surprise, and quiet indignation. My parents stood on the porch, looking as if they'd been caught stealing from their own family. Eric's jaw clenched. He moved toward his truck, then stopped, as if reconsidering what storm he'd tried to conjure. I felt the old cabin settle around us like a judge. The air smelled of pine and the sugar of someone's famous coffee. I realized, with a cold little thrill, that I'd forced them to choose between two things: double down and make this legal and ugly, or step back and let everyone see the person they'd become. Before either of those choices could be made, a car turned into the drive. It wasn't one I recognized at first. A white sedan pulled up slow, and out stepped Mrs. Klein from down the lane. The woman who'd been Aunt June's closest friend, a woman who'd never been loud, but whose word in town carried weight. She looked at Mom, then at me, then she smiled the kind of smile that means she's on the side of truth. "That's enough talking," she said, voice soft and direct. "Let's make the pie table then. Everyone's hungry." Mom opened her mouth to protest, but the look around the yard, filled with people who showed up because dignity matters, turned protests into stage whispers. Eric muttered something under his breath and stalked toward the pier. Dad stood frozen, caught between his wife's fury and the small, swelling chorus of neighbors whose loyalty he'd forgotten to measure. I felt Jenna's hand find mine. "You did well," she whispered. "You did the right, quiet thing." I didn't have time to answer, because from the corner of my eye I saw Eric pull his phone out and start recording, his lips moving in a rapid, vicious whisper. He was calling someone or filming. Whatever it was, his expression was that of a man cornered enough to bite. And in the seconds before he hit send, before he could spin this into a legal threat or a smear, someone else did something that made the world tilt. Uncle Greg walked over to Eric, put a hand on his shoulder, and said, very quietly, "If you take this to a lawyer, you'll lose more than a cabin." Eric's phone slipped from his hand. He looked at Greg, at my father, at the neighbor crowd, at the notary who'd been watching like the law itself, and for the first time I saw doubt. Not the sharp doubt of calculation, but the ragged kind that comes when your web of conveniences collapses. He turned and walked toward his truck, slamming the door with a force that rattled the windows. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then my mom started to cry. Not the dramatic, well-practiced kind, but real tears. Those quick, hot things that come when someone realizes they've misjudged what they wanted. She wrapped her arms around herself and muttered, "We're family. We're family." Like a litany she could not undo. People started to gather chairs and plates. Conversations hummed. The issue hadn't been resolved. Far from it, but the framing had changed. What was once an attempt at a quiet, administrative reshuffle had become a communal conversation about fairness and belonging. The crowd's presence made certain moves risky for my parents and Eric. Publicity is a strange thing. Sometimes it protects, sometimes it punishes, but it always complicates the comfort of secrecy. I breathed in the smell of pine and coffee and pie and realized I'd crossed a line I hadn't been sure I would cross 2 days earlier. I'd turned a private grievance into a public stand. I felt the old, familiar ache that comes with family wounds. But underneath it was something else. A firm, cool satisfaction that I'd reclaimed a place that was never supposed to be a trophy. Just then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number scrolled across the screen. We saw the posts. Want to help with the legal side? We have experience with deeds and elderly trusts. The message was short, to the point, and unsigned. I looked up. The smile that had been building inside me faltered only slightly. There were now, quietly, multiple fronts, neighbors and extended family on one side, the looming threat of lawsuits on the other. The next move would matter. I turned to Jenna. "This has to be careful," I said. "If they go legal, I don't want this to get ugly for anyone." She squeezed my hand. "Then we do this right." I pulled out the deed again, feeling the paper between my fingers like a talisman. Around us, the yard buzzed with normal human things. Muffins, laughter, the clink of plates. But under it all, a complex chess game had begun. My parents and Eric could choose to escalate. They could also choose to repair things. Before they had a chance to decide, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from a number I recognized. Dad's lawyer, the one my parents had mentioned in a tone that had made my blood go cold. The porch fell into a hush as I answered. On the other end, a measured voice said, "Mr. Matthews, we've been retained by your parents. We need to speak." I listened, keeping my voice steady, then nodded at Jenna. "We'll listen. But know this. We have documents, witnesses, and a community that remembers Grandpa. If this goes to court, it won't be private." There was a pause on the line, a breath where someone recalculated. Then the voice said, "Understood. We'll be in touch." I hung up and looked out at the crowd. Friends, cousins, neighbors, the notary, even my father, who was talking quietly to Aunt June. The scene was fragile and beautiful and dangerous in ways I hadn't anticipated. The revenge had begun not with a single explosive act, but with a slow accumulation of evidence, community, and the quiet courage to call things by their name. And yet, as the lawyer's number stilled in my phone, I felt the air tighten. This was no longer just about a weekend or a campfire photo. It was about legacy, about how families treat the promises left to them. It was about whether small acts of exclusion could be allowed to calcify into ownership. Eric reappeared at the edge of the yard, his face hard as flint. He walked up to my dad and whispered something that made my father's shoulders cave. My mother, who'd been drying her cheeks, looked suddenly like a woman who'd remembered an old command she could issue. I didn't have time to react because from the path down by the boathouse came the sound of a car door slamming, an unfamiliar cadence. Heads turned. Faces shifted. The next arrival was someone I hadn't expected, and their presence would change the math of the day in a way neither side had counted on. I took a breath, the kind you take before you open a letter that will change everything, and waited to see who'd stepped out of that car. The car by the boathouse was a sleek black SUV I didn't recognize at first, but as it pulled closer and the engine idled, I saw who was behind the wheel: my cousin Evelyn. She had always been subtle, the type who liked to watch chaos from the sidelines. But her expression this time was sharp, determined. She stepped out, tall and confident, a folder tucked under her arm. Thought you could use some backup, she said, her voice even, but carrying weight. And I mean in a legal sense. I've been looking into Mom and Eric's side. They've been shady with the cabin funds for years. The crowd stirred, murmuring. My parents looked as though they'd just been caught holding a loaded deck of cards. Eric's jaw tightened, and for once, the arrogance I'd come to expect from him faltered. Evelyn moved forward and handed the folder to me. Inside were copies of bank statements, invoices, and emails showing Mom and Eric had been funneling some of the cabin rental money into accounts not disclosed to the other heirs. It wasn't illegal, strictly speaking, but it was manipulation of the cabin's shared resources, and if ever reviewed publicly or legally, it would look bad, very bad. I looked up at them calmly. You've spent years pretending this cabin was only about Eric and Mom. The truth is everyone has a stake, and you've been trying to privatize it under the guise of practicality. The bookings I refunded? That was a reminder that the cabin isn't just yours to control. My mom opened her mouth, then closed it. Troy, you're overreacting. This is family. We can talk this through. No, I said firmly, letting the word hang in the air. This isn't a conversation anymore. You've already decided who deserves access, who is welcome, and who isn't. You've excluded us, hidden the bookings, and posted photos online as if none of this mattered. You've made your choices. I'm simply making mine. Eric's face turned red. You can't just. Yes, I can, I interrupted. I can protect my rights. I can enforce the clause Grandpa left in the deed. And I can make sure anyone who tries to manipulate this property like a trophy sees the consequences. He spun around, storming toward his truck. This isn't over. You'll regret. I didn't let him finish. I reached for my phone and sent the last of my scheduled notifications. The family celebration at Grandpa's cabin post, now live to the wider circle of neighbors, friends, and relatives. Comments started appearing almost immediately. Can't believe they tried to do that. We'll be there. Grandpa would have wanted it shared. Each notification, each affirmation from the community made the hold Eric and Mom thought they had completely irrelevant. Mom tried to intervene, but Evelyn had anticipated that. She stepped between Mom and me, holding up a hand. You've had your turn, Evelyn said quietly. Now it's time to respect the agreement. The rest of the day passed like a controlled, unfolding drama. Neighbors and family arrived, helping set up chairs and tables. Aunt June served lemonade. Mara set the coffee out, and even Dad quietly helped arrange things without saying much. Eric tried to whisper and pull people aside, but nobody followed him. His influence evaporated in the face of the facts, the witnesses, and the community he'd ignored. By evening, the campfire was lit, not a private, exclusive gathering, but a real, shared one. My wife Jenna, Evelyn, and I sat together, watching the firelight dance across the faces of family and neighbors who were finally seeing the cabin for what it was meant to be, a place for everyone. Mom didn't speak to me directly all night. Eric kept to himself near the water, glaring occasionally but not daring to interfere. My father avoided eye contact but didn't try to stop anyone. It became clear that Mom and Eric's power had been broken, not by shouting, not by confrontation, but by carefully using the rules they thought they could bend and showing everyone what their choices revealed. By the end of the evening, the cabin was alive again in a way that hadn't happened in years. Laughter echoed across the lake. People shared stories of Grandpa, of summers long past, and of small victories over injustice. Mom and Eric were physically present but emotionally absent, isolated by their own entitlement and the choices they had made. I didn't forgive them, and I didn't pretend this restored any warmth between us. The cabin would now be managed transparently, with all heirs consulted for every decision. Any attempt to override the unanimous consent clause would be met with witnesses, legal documentation, and community accountability. My parents had shown their true colors. They were villains in a family drama of their own making, and now everyone could see it. As I looked out across the lake, the fire reflecting in my eyes, I realized something. Revenge isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about reclaiming what's yours and making sure the people who tried to steal it can never do so again. Mom and Eric could sulk, they could scheme, they could imagine that they still held sway, But the truth, the community, and the law were on my side. That night, as the cabin settled into quiet, with everyone else leaving or settling near the fire, I knew the balance had shifted. Not just for me, but for the generations to come. The cabin would remain a gift for all of us, not a prize for the entitled. And for once, the people who tried to manipulate, exclude, and control were the ones left watching as their plans burned quietly in the glow of a fire that couldn't be extinguished. The situation now was clear. I had regained control. Mom and Eric had lost the advantage they thought they had, and Grandpa's legacy was finally protected. They remained villains in the story, selfish, entitled, manipulative, and I had ensured everyone could see them for exactly what they were. There was no reconciliation, no forgiveness, just the quiet, permanent knowledge that their scheme had failed. And I smiled, because sometimes winning quietly is the sweetest revenge of all. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.